On October 20th, 2025, the world held its breath over the frozen plains of Bryansk, Russia. Beneath that silence pulsed a lifeline of war, the Bryansk fuel distribution hub, a maze of steel and pressure valves pumping more than 1.7 million gallons of diesel each day, feeding 3 Russian armored divisions across the front. Guarded by S-400 Triumph systems, Pantsir S1 cannons, and Buk M3 launchers, it stood like a billion-dollar fortress of firepower and pride. But hundreds of miles away, inside a dim Ukrainian command center, the glow of a single satellite blip broke the calm. One convoy moved off pattern. One pulse of heat where there shouldn't be. After 43 days of tracking and 9 terabytes of data, the target was alive, vulnerable, and waiting. Before dawn, 2 nations would test not just weapons but ideas, courage against confidence, technology against tradition. What followed would echo across every command room from Kyiv to Moscow. If you want to see how intelligence can bend the shape of war, subscribe to the channel. And if you are ready to witness what happened next, comment the number 1 below. At 3:02 a.m., the frozen plains near Bryansk, Russia vibrated under the steady hum of diesel engines. Inside that white silence stood the Bryansk fuel distribution hub, an artery pumping about 1.7 million gallons of diesel every 24 hours, enough to keep 3 Russian armored divisions moving across the front. In a bunker overlooking the steel maze of tanks and pipes, a colonel stirred his black tea with the calm of a man certain his defenses could not fail. Around him stood S-400 systems, Pantsir S1 guns, and Buk M3 launchers. The combined value of that hardware could fund a small nation's army. On every map, the hub appeared untouchable. But maps do not feel fear. In a dim room hundreds of miles away, a Ukrainian analyst studied a flicker on a satellite feed. A single convoy arriving at 3 a.m. looked routine, yet something in its pattern was wrong. The same mistake had preceded disaster months before. The clock was quietly starting again. If that artery were cut, the offensive would bleed before sunrise. Tell me, would you risk a $20,000 drone to cripple a billion-dollar machine? What would you sacrifice to stop a war? At 4:10 a.m., the sky above Bryansk glowed faint blue as radar dishes turned like restless eyes. Russia called this sector untouchable. On paper it was. The air defenses around the Bryansk hub formed one of the densest networks in Europe with S-400 Triumph launchers, Pantsir S1 defense cannons, and Buk M3 systems spread across 20 square miles of reinforced ground. Together they could track 300 targets at once and fire missiles faster than a pitcher's throw in the World Series. The S-400 alone carried a price tag of more than $500 million per battery, engineered to knock down stealth jets from 50 miles away. Soldiers joked it could hit a mosquito in a hurricane. But even fortresses have habits, and habits breed cracks. The radar crews changed shifts every 3 hours, and the Krasuka 4 electronic jammers powered down to cool their systems just before dawn. Inside the bunker, the colonel trusted his screens. He believed in charts, not ghosts. Outside, frost thickened on the antennas while a satellite high above watched in silence. So tell me, what happens when confidence turns into blindness? Would you sleep easy behind $1 billion of armor if the enemy could not be seen? At 5:42 a.m., inside a dim operations room near Dnipro, the air carried the low hum of computers and the smell of strong coffee. Rows of monitors glowed with satellite images, drone telemetry, and infrared scans of the Bryansk sector. Ukraine was not gambling tonight. It was calculating. At the center stood Major Mikhailo Kushnir, the calm architect of Operation Frost Vein. For 43 days, his team had tracked every Russian convoy that fueled the northern front. They collected more than 9 terabytes of reconnaissance data, from heat signatures to road vibrations. The patterns told a story no one in Moscow wanted to believe. The plan was simple to describe, but brutal to execute. A Bayraktar TB2 would climb to about 18,000 feet, scanning for heat flares across the hub. Once the data locked in, a HIMARS M142 battery near Sumy would fire 6 guided rockets, each with the force of about 2,000 pounds of TNT. The margin of error was less than 3 feet. Below the clouds, a pair of modified DJI Mavic 3T drones hovered just above the frost line, smaller than hawks and quieter than snow. They streamed live targeting feeds through Starlink uplinks, shifting frequencies dozens of times each second, faster than any Russian jammer could catch. This was not brute force. It was elegance in motion, a choreography of code, satellites, and nerve. Ukraine was sending intelligence instead of volume, turning consumer technology into battlefield precision. Every person in that room knew the meaning of what came next. Once the rockets launched, there was no rewind, no safe option, no undo button. So think about it. If a single strike could drain an army's lifeline before sunrise, would you take the shot? Would you risk a few $1 million of tech to break a billion-dollar machine? At 6:08 a.m., the air above Bryansk was so still that a man could hear the frost crack on steel. The snow shimmered in the refinery lights, calm, quiet, certain. No one standing guard imagined that the sky was about to turn into fire. 300 miles away, across the border in Ukraine, Major Mikhailo Kushner leaned over a glowing console. The operations room near Dnipro pulsed with light and tension. A soft digital chime broke the silence. The Bayraktar TB2 had reached altitude, about 18,000 feet, and its sensors began to sweep the frozen landscape, tracing heat and motion across the screen like a painter brushing red on black. Every vent, every truck, every movement inside the Bryansk hub glowed in shades of infrared. At that same moment, 2 DJI Mavic 3T scouts skimmed the treetops, flying less than 200 feet above the snow. From above, they looked like birds, but they were streaming updates through Starlink relays every millisecond. Each gust of wind, each change in radar echo, was being fed into an algorithm that learned faster than any human could think. In a forward position near Sumy, the HIMARS M142 crew watched their coordinates lock in. Range 58 miles, flight time 52 seconds, payload 6 GMLRS rounds, each carrying almost 2,000 pounds of explosive. The men checked the wind, then waited for the word. Kushner looked at the countdown, then spoke. Fire! The first rocket leapt from the launcher with a flash so bright it burned the darkness away. The roar followed, rolling across the fields like thunder trying to wake the earth. One by one, 5 more rockets followed. The sound was raw power, 6 lines of fire carving across the dawn. For the next minute, gravity and geometry ruled. The rockets rose into the upper air, curving like burning spears guided by code. Above Bryansk, radar screens screamed alive. The S-492 N6E radar picked up signals and pushed them through computers built to hunt stealth jets. But these were not jets. They were faster and smaller, invisible in the clutter of a winter storm. The colonel shouted for the Pantsir S1 to engage. The Krasika 4 jamming trucks powered up, flooding the airwaves with static. The interference was strong enough to kill a phone signal from 5 miles away. But the drones were speaking on their own frequency, hopping channels dozens of times every second through encrypted Starlink feeds. It was like trying to grab lightning with bare hands. The Bayraktar TB2 dropped to a lower altitude and released 2 small decoys that mimicked missile heat signatures. The S-400 fired 2 interceptors, each worth several $1 million, and hit nothing but sky. The real strike was still invisible. 45 seconds to impact. A snowstorm pushed in from the west, thick and heavy. Visibility fell to less than 60 feet. The Russian gunners inside the Pantsir trucks could see only white static. Their infrared scopes glowed red with heat from their own exhaust. 30 seconds. The first DJI Mavic 3T shuddered as shockwaves of the approaching rockets rippled through the air. In Bryansk, a driver stepped out of his cab and looked up. 6 glowing streaks were falling toward him like shooting stars. 20 seconds. Inside the bunker, the colonel barked orders again, but the command net lagged by 4 seconds. The radar grid was choking on ghost echoes bouncing off decoys. The Buk M3 launchers turned left, then right, lost between hundreds of false targets. 10 seconds. Kushner stared at the monitor. 6 green arcs curved toward a single red pulse, the heart of the fuel hub. He did not blink. At 6:10 a.m., the first rocket struck. The explosion hit with the force of an earthquake, tearing through steel and concrete. Two more impacts followed almost instantly, the pressure wave rolling outward faster than sound. The hub disappeared in a wall of flame. Fire climbed 200 feet into the sky, feeding on more than 1 million gallons of diesel. The heat reached 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit, enough to melt pipes like candle wax. The blast shattered windows 15 miles away, and for a few seconds, the night turned to daylight. Inside the command bunker, silence. Then alarms. The S-400 sensors were blinded by heat. The Pantsir S1 crews saw nothing but static. Overhead, the Bayraktar TB2 recorded it all. On infrared, the refinery looked like a volcano, rivers of burning fuel running through the snow. Within a minute, smoke covered the sky. Russian radar stations near Moscow picked up the heat bloom and mistook it for a missile launch. The shockwave reached Dnipro in 30 seconds. The lights in Kushnir's bunker flickered as the ground trembled. He looked at the screen, calm, almost sad. The math had worked. But war is not math. Reports exploded across Russian networks. Total loss of the Bryansk fuel depot. Power drops across Smolensk and Kursk. Fuel convoys frozen for reinspection. Communications delayed on the northern front. A single precision strike had turned a stronghold into silence. Analysts inside Moscow said it could not have happened. The S-400 was supposed to be unbeatable, yet 6 rockets worth less than $5 million total had slipped through a shield worth billions. By sunrise, more than 35 supply convoys were halted, and tank units near Kursk had less than half their normal fuel. The entire region slowed to a crawl. By 7 a.m., the smoke stretched 9 miles wide and 3 miles tall. From orbit, satellites recorded a heat signature brighter than any city in western Russia. State media waited hours before admitting a minor fire. But every soldier in Bryansk knew what they had seen. Ukraine had not just hit a depot, it had hit an idea. Technology had changed the rules. A few $1 million of code and courage had erased $1 billion of arrogance. It was not brute force, it was choreography, a dance between precision and timing, brain and machine. Kushnir stood in silence. Outside, the world was still burning. He whispered softly, "Physics does not take sides. Now tell me, if intelligence can turn steel into smoke, what is real strength? Is it armor, or is it the mind that knows where to strike?" At 8:12 a.m., the smoke from Bryansk was still climbing into the upper atmosphere, visible to satellites orbiting 200 miles above Earth. What began as 6 rockets from a HIMARS M142 had turned into an inferno, consuming 1.2 million gallons of diesel. By the time Russian firefighters reached the hub, the temperature was still over 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to warp tank armor. Across the border, Major Mikhailo Kushnir stood in silence. Reports flooded in faster than radio waves. The strike had slashed Russian fuel output by 40% across the northern corridor. Convoys near Kursk were stranded, and artillery near Sumy fell silent. A $20,000 precision system had paused a $2 billion war machine. Inside Moscow, briefings turned into arguments. The S-400 commanders blamed snow interference. The ministry blamed satellite delays. But the truth was simpler. Technology had outthought tradition. By sunset, the flames at Bryansk burned like a lighthouse of warning, visible from 50 miles away. So let me ask you, when brains can bankrupt brute force, what does victory really mean? If intelligence can rewrite the map of war, which side of history would you stand on? War in the end is never just about missiles, drones, or steel. It is about minds, about the human will to think, adapt, and outsmart. What happened over Bryansk on that cold morning in October 2025 was not only a military strike, it was a turning point, a reminder that intelligence has become the most powerful weapon of our century. Ukraine showed the world that courage and creativity can rewrite equations that once seemed unshakable. A few $1 million in software, timing, and data science brought down defenses worth billions. It was David versus Goliath once again, but this time David held a tablet instead of a sling. The lesson is simple and clear. Power is not measured in tanks or rockets, but in the minds that guide them. For everyone watching this, remember that knowledge, precision, and persistence can break barriers that look impossible. What Ukraine proved that day is something we can all apply far beyond the battlefield. Preparation beats size. Intelligence beats arrogance. Innovation beats fear. If you have watched until now, you are part of a story that values thought over noise. Tell me, what did you feel during this journey? If you are still here, comment the number 1 below, subscribe to the channel, and join us as we explore more stories where intelligence changes the fate of nations.